Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving deep into the Indian legal system.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? But don't worry, you don't need a law degree or anything to follow along.
Yeah, definitely not.
We're going to be focusing on these things called the NCLT and the NCLA.
Okay.
And these are basically like specialized courts or tribunals
Right.
that handle some really important stuff for businesses, like when companies go bankrupt or when they want to merge together, that kind of thing. So they're actually super important for like the whole Indian economy because they affect things like,
Right.
whether people want to invest in India or not, and like the fate of huge companies. Like,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
think about like all the jobs and stuff that are tied to those big companies.
Yeah, it's a big deal for sure.
Exactly. So what's really interesting is that the Supreme Court of India
Okay.
just came out with like a major judgment on these tribunals, and let's just say they did not hold back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they used some pretty strong language, like saying they had strong exception to how things were going. And they even called out a growing tendency to disregard the Supreme Court's own orders.
Oh, that sounds serious.
Yeah, it's some serious courtroom drama for sure.
So what exactly got the Supreme Court so riled up? Like, what were their main criticisms?
Well, one of the biggest issues is that these tribunals
Yeah.
haven't always been following the Supreme Court's orders. Like,
Right.
when the Supreme Court says do this or do that, the tribunals are supposed to follow those rulings.
Yeah, of course. Like, it just makes sense.
Right. It's like the whole legal system is based on this hierarchy, right?
Exactly.
Where higher courts have the final say.
Yeah, like if every court could just ignore what the Supreme Court said, it would be chaos.
Exactly. Total chaos. So this defiance of the Supreme Court's orders is a really big deal.
And it probably makes people nervous to do business in India if they think the legal system isn't reliable.
Totally. Like if you're a foreign investor thinking about putting millions of dollars into India,
Right.
you want to be sure that the courts are going to play by the rules.
Absolutely. You need that stability and predictability.
Exactly. And on top of that, the Supreme Court also criticized the tribunals for lacking expertise.
Oh, really? So, like, the people making these decisions don't actually have the right background.
Well, that's what the Supreme Court is saying.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that a lot of the tribunal members don't have enough specialized knowledge to be handling these really complex cases.
Right, because these aren't like simple traffic tickets or something.
Exactly. We're talking about company insolvencies and mergers.
Yeah, that's some serious financial and legal stuff.
Right, and those cases can have huge consequences for businesses, for investors,
Absolutely.
even for like regular people who might lose their jobs if a company goes under.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So the Supreme Court is basically saying that you need people with a deep understanding of insolvency law and all the financial stuff that goes with it.
It makes sense you wouldn't want someone who's never even read a balance sheet deciding the fate of a multi-million-dollar company.
It's kind of like asking a pastry chef to perform brain surgery, right?
Oof. Yeah, that's a bad idea.
You need someone with the right skills for the job.
Exactly.
And the Supreme Court also pointed out some serious problems with, like, the infrastructure of these tribunals.
Infrastructure. So, like, the actual buildings and stuff?
Yeah, well, that's part of it, but it's also about things like
Okay.
not having enough courtrooms, not having enough staff, like clerks and assistants. And all of that just adds up to a system that's super slow and inefficient.
So it's like a busy hospital with not enough doctors or beds or something.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy. They're dealing with this huge volume of cases
Wow.
that are like super important for India's economy, but they just don't have the resources to keep up.
That's got to be incredibly frustrating for everyone involved.
Oh, totally. And especially in these insolvency cases where like
Right.
every minute counts.
Right.
It's like, you're trying to salvage a sinking ship.
Right.
And the longer it takes, the more damage is done and the less you can save.
Oh, I see what you mean. So delays can be really costly.
Exactly. So it's not just about legal technicalities here. We're talking about
Right.
real-world consequences for businesses, for investors, and for the whole Indian economy.
Absolutely.
And to make matters even worse, there are tons of vacancies in these tribunals.
Vacancies? You mean like open positions that aren't filled?
Yeah, exactly.
Ugh. So it's like they're short-staffed, and then on top of that, they have all these empty positions.
Right. It's like trying to run a marathon with a sprained ankle and a heavy backpack.
Ouch, that sounds painful.
It's not going to be pretty, and it's going to take forever.
And then there's the issue of political influence, which is a whole other can of worms.
Okay, now that's where things get really juicy.
Juicy how so? Like, what kind of political influence are we talking about?
Well, the Supreme Court didn't name any names or anything,
Right.
but they expressed concern that some tribunal members might be getting appointed based on political connections
Oh, I see.
rather than their actual qualifications and expertise.
Yeah, that's not good.
Right. It raises questions about whether decisions are being made based on the law and the facts, or whether there's some kind of political pressure going on behind the scenes.
That would definitely undermine people's trust in the system.
Totally, especially for foreign investors who are looking for a level playing field.
Right. They want to know that their investments are safe and that the courts are fair and impartial.
Exactly. Imagine pouring millions of dollars into a venture in India, only to find out that the legal decisions could be swayed by political whims or something.
Yikes. That's a recipe for disaster.
It would make anyone think twice about investing in India.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've got all these problems, right? Defiance of the Supreme Court, lack of expertise, infrastructure issues,
Right.
and this whole question of political influence. So it sounds like the NCLTs and the NCLAT are in desperate need of a makeover.
They definitely need some work.
But what exactly is the Supreme Court proposing? Did they just point out all these problems, or did they offer some solutions?
Oh, they had some thoughts for sure.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the Supreme Court, they didn't just criticize, they actually offered some solutions.
Okay, that's good to hear. So what did they suggest?
First of all, they really emphasized the need for strict timelines in these insolvency proceedings.
Okay, so sticking to a schedule.
Exactly, because the current law, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016,
Right.
it already lays out specific timeframes for different stages of the process, how long things should take. And the Supreme Court is basically saying hey, you need to stick to these deadlines.
So no more dragging things out for years and years.
Exactly. Because remember, in these cases, time is literally money.
Right.
The longer it takes to resolve an insolvency case, the more a company's assets lose value.
It's like waiting too long to sell your stock.
Yeah, kind of. Or imagine you're trying to sell a melting ice sculpture.
Okay, that's a good one.
The longer you wait, the less you have left to sell.
Right, it just keeps shrinking and shrinking.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
speed is key.
Okay, so that's timelines. What about the expertise problem? How do you fix that?
Well, the Supreme Court recommended a much more rigorous selection process for tribunal members.
Okay, so being more careful about who they appoint.
Exactly. They're saying look, you need to appoint people who really know their stuff when it comes to insolvency law.
So not just any lawyer will do.
Right. It's not enough to just have a general legal background. You need specialized knowledge and experience in this very specific field.
It makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't want someone who's only read Insolvency for Dummies making decisions that could affect thousands of people's livelihoods.
Yeah, that would be a recipe for disaster. And then, of course, there's the whole infrastructure issue.
Right. Did the Supreme Court offer any solutions for that?
Yeah, they basically urged the government to give these tribunals the resources they need,
Right.
more courtrooms, more staff, updated technology, that kind of thing.
So basic stuff that any court needs to function properly.
Exactly, because you can't expect a system to be efficient if it's constantly bogged down by logistical nightmares.
It's like trying to run a high-tech company using dial-up internet and a fax machine.
Yeah, basically.
So the Supreme Court has laid out a roadmap for improvement, but the big question is, will these suggestions actually be implemented?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. Because the Supreme Court can issue judgments and make recommendations. But ultimately, it's up to the government to actually take action and allocate the necessary resources.
So this is where political will comes in.
Exactly. If the government is serious about attracting foreign investment and boosting the economy, they need to make these reforms a priority.
So we'll have to wait and see if they actually put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, we'll have to see if they actually follow through.
But there's another piece of the puzzle here, right? Public perception. How do you think this judgment will impact the way people view the Indian legal system?
That's a good question. It's kind of a double-edged sword, I think.
Oh, so?
Well, on the one hand, it shines a light on some pretty serious problems, which could initially make some investors nervous.
They might think, oh, wow, India's legal system is a mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the fact that the Supreme Court is acknowledging these problems and proposing solutions
Right.
could actually be seen as a positive sign.
At least they're not trying to sweep it under the rug.
Right. It shows that there's a willingness to address these issues and strive for a more transparent and efficient system.
So it's kind of like a company admitting to a product defect and then issuing a recall to fix it?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
It's not ideal, but it shows they're taking responsibility.
And that they're trying to make things right.
Exactly. And that kind of transparency and accountability can go a long way in rebuilding trust.
Absolutely. Of course, actions speak louder than words.
Right. Investors will be watching closely to see if real changes are implemented.
It's like in a relationship, apologies are great,
Mm-hmm.
but they need to be backed up by real change and consistent effort.
That's a great analogy.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've talked about the Supreme Court's critique, their proposed solutions, the role of the government,
Right.
and the impact on investor perception. But let's zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture. Like, what's the overall significance of this judgment? What does it tell us about the state of India's legal system?
I think it's a wake-up call,
Okay.
not just for the NCLTs and the NCLAT,
Mm-hmm.
but for the entire Indian legal system.
Okay.
It highlights the need for greater efficiency, expertise, and transparency across the board.
It's like a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied.
Exactly, especially in the fast-paced world of business where things move so quickly.
And it also underscores the importance of having a legal system that's free from political interference.
Absolutely. That's crucial, not just for attracting foreign investment, but also for ensuring fairness and equal opportunity for all Indian businesses, big and small.
Right. So it's not just about big companies and investors.
No, it's about creating a level playing field for everyone.
Okay, so this judgment has some pretty big implications. But what does it all mean for our listener? You know, the person who might not be a legal expert, but is interested in understanding how these issues affect their lives.
All right, like what's the takeaway message here?
Well,
I think the main takeaway is that a well-functioning legal system is in everyone's best interest.
right. Like it's not just about lawyers and judges and all that.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where businesses can thrive,
Yeah.
investors feel confident, and disputes are resolved fairly and efficiently.
So it's like the foundation of a healthy economy.
Yeah, exactly. And when the system works well, it benefits everyone. You know, it creates jobs, it fosters innovation.
Right. It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. And it ultimately improves people's lives.
So it's not just about legal jargon and courtroom drama.
No, not at all.
It's really about the foundation of a prosperous and just society.
Absolutely. And while this particular judgment focused on the NCLTs and the NCLT, it really highlights broader themes
Oh, yeah, for sure.
that are relevant to any legal system.
Right. Like, what are some of those themes?
Well, like the importance of efficiency, expertise, transparency, and independence.
Yeah, those are all super important.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we should all be paying attention to how our legal institutions are functioning.
Right, because they affect all of us.
Exactly, whether we realize it or not.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about.
It has.
From the intricacies of insolvency law to the inner workings of India's judicial system, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Okay, shoot.
So the Supreme Court really emphasized how important investor confidence is for a healthy economy.
Right.
So here's the question. How might these issues with the NCLTs and the NCLA impact India's ability to attract foreign investment, especially in key sectors like technology and manufacturing that are so crucial for India's future growth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that policymakers in India need to think carefully about.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out
For sure.
and whether real changes are made.
Fingers crossed.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Be sure to check out our show notes.
Yes.
For further reading on this fascinating topic, and until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.